The bullet grazed so close to Adelaide Preston's cheek that she felt the heat of it before her horse reared and threw her into the Kansas dust. And in that moment, sprawled in the dirt with her skirts tangled around her legs and blood trickling from her scraped palms, she knew the entire town of Opal would have one more reason to call her unmarriageable. She pushed herself up on shaking arms, her dark hair falling from its pins in wild tangles around her face. The outlaws who had fired at the stagecoach were already disappearing over the ridge, their whoops and hollers fading into the afternoon heat. The driver lay slumped over his seat, blood spreading across his chest, and Adelaide's stomach lurched as she realized he was not moving. "Sir? Sir, can you hear me?" She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the pain shooting through her ankle, and climbed up to check on him. Her fingers found no pulse at his throat. Dead. The word settled in her mind like a stone dropping into still water. She had seen death before, working as she did at the town's small hospital, but it never became easier. The other passenger, an elderly woman traveling to visit her daughter, was unconscious but breathing. Adelaide checked her carefully, finding a nasty bump on her head where she had struck the side of the coach. She would need proper medical attention soon. Adelaide looked around at the empty prairie stretching in all directions. They were at least 5 miles from Opal, maybe more. The horses had scattered when the shooting started. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, and she knew the temperature would drop sharply once darkness fell. September in Kansas could be unforgiving. She tore strips from her petticoat and bandaged her own bleeding palms, then did what she could to make the older woman comfortable. There was nothing to be done for the driver except to close his eyes and murmur a prayer she half remembered from childhood. The sound of hoofbeats made her freeze. Her hand went to the small knife she kept in her boot, the only weapon she had. If the outlaws were coming back, she would not go down without a fight, no matter how futile. But the rider who appeared over the rise was alone, and as he drew closer, she could see he wore no bandana over his face, no gun drawn. He sat his horse with the easy grace of someone born in the saddle, and even from a distance, she could see his eyes scanning the scene, taking in every detail. "Anyone hurt?" he called out as he approached, his voice carrying clearly across the prairie. "The driver is dead," Adelaide called back. "The other passenger needs a doctor. I am Adelaide Preston. I work at the hospital in Opal." He dismounted in one fluid motion and strode toward her. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a startling shade of gray-green, like sage after rain. He could not have been much older than 25 or 26. "Lucas Zimmerman," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I heard the shots from my ranch about 2 miles east. Are you injured?" "Nothing serious, but Mrs. Henderson needs help soon." Adelaide gestured to the unconscious woman. Lucas moved past her to examine the elderly woman with surprisingly gentle hands. "Concussion, likely. We need to get her back to town." He looked at Adelaide more carefully, his gaze taking in her torn dress, her bloodied hands, her tangled hair. "You are hurt." "I have had worse," Adelaide said, which was true. Working at the hospital meant exposure to all manner of injuries and illnesses. She had been spat on, shoved, and once nearly stabbed by a delirious patient. Scraped palms barely registered. Something in Lucas's expression shifted, a flicker of what might have been respect crossing his features. "Can you ride?" "Of course." He whistled, and his horse trotted over obediently. "We will have to ride double. I will carry Mrs. Henderson. Can you manage to hold on behind me?" Adelaide wanted to protest, to insist she could walk back to town or that there must be some other solution, but pragmatism won out. "Yes." Lucas lifted Mrs. Henderson with surprising ease, settling her across his saddle. Adelaide used the stirrup to pull herself up behind him, biting back a gasp as her injured ankle protested. She had no choice but to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from sliding off. "Hold tight," Lucas said, and urged his horse into a smooth canter. Adelaide had ridden horses all her life, but never like this, pressed against a man's back with her arms around him, feeling the flex of his muscles as he guided the horse with expert precision. She could smell leather and soap, and something distinctly masculine that made her heart beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with the afternoon's excitement. They rode in silence for the first mile. Then Lucas spoke without turning his head. "You were very calm back there." "Most women would have been hysterical," Adelaide bristled. "Most women would have done exactly what I did. We are not made of porcelain, despite what men seem to think." She felt rather than saw his smile. "I stand corrected." "You should," she said tartly. "I have been dealing with emergencies for 3 years at the hospital. A stagecoach robbery is nothing compared to Mrs. Whittaker's childbirth last month. 23 hours of labor and twins. Both healthy, mother too." There was pride in Adelaide's voice. She had worked alongside old Dr. Morrison through that entire ordeal, and when he had collapsed from exhaustion after the first baby was born, she had delivered the second one herself. "The town is lucky to have you." Adelaide laughed, a bitter sound. "The town tolerates me. There is a difference." She felt Lucas tense slightly beneath her hands. "Tolerates you." They were approaching the outskirts of Opal now, and Adelaide could see the familiar buildings coming into view. The general store, the saloon, the small white church where she had been baptized 24 years ago. The hospital was on the far side of town, a modest wooden building that Dr. Morrison had built with his own savings. "It does not matter," Adelaide said, though it did matter, more than she cared to admit. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Zimmerman. I can manage from here." But Lucas did not stop at the edge of town. He rode straight down the main street, and Adelaide was acutely aware of the stares they drew. Mrs. Harriet Fletcher stood on the boardwalk outside her dress shop, her mouth falling open in shock. Mr. Thompson paused in sweeping the entrance to his saloon. Young Tommy Richards stopped mid-step, his eyes wide. "Really, Mr. Zimmerman, you can let me down," Adelaide hissed. "Not until we reach the hospital," he said calmly. "Doctor." Morrison was standing outside the hospital door when they arrived, as if he had been waiting for them. His weathered face creased with concern when he saw Mrs. Henderson's limp form. "Stagecoach robbery," Lucas explained as he dismounted and carefully lifted the unconscious woman. "She took a blow to the head." "Bring her inside," Dr. Morrison said. "Adelaide, are you injured?" "Minor scrapes," Adelaide said, sliding down from the horse with less grace than she would have liked. Her ankle nearly gave out beneath her, and Lucas's hand shot out to steady her. "That ankle needs looking at," he said. "I said I am fine. And I say you are not." His gray-green eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Please, let the doctor examine you." There was something in his voice, a gentleness that contrasted with his firm tone that made Adelaide relent. "Very well, but Mrs. Henderson must be seen first." She limped into the hospital, very aware of Lucas following close behind her. Dr. Morrison was already examining Mrs. Henderson, his practiced hands checking for injuries while Adelaide assisted him, her own discomfort forgotten in the familiar routine of medical care. Lucas stood near the door, watching silently. Adelaide could feel his gaze on her as she worked, mixing a poultice for the bump on Mrs. Henderson's head, checking her pupil responses, monitoring her breathing. It was unnerving having him there, this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere and now seemed reluctant to leave. "She will recover," Dr. Morrison announced finally. The concussion is not severe, but she must rest. Adelaide, send word to her daughter in Lawrence. I will ride to Lawrence myself, Lucas said. It is only 15 miles. Dr. Morrison looked at him properly for the first time. That is kind of you, Mr. Zimmerman. You are the one who bought the old Henderson ranch, are you not? Yes, sir. 6 months ago. We have not had the pleasure of making your acquaintance. You keep to yourself out there. Lucas's expression was carefully neutral. I prefer solitude. Well, you have done this town a service today. Dr. Morrison turned to Adelaide. Now let me look at that ankle. Adelaide sat reluctantly while the doctor examined her. The ankle was badly sprained but not broken. He wrapped it tightly and ordered her to stay off it for at least a week. A week? Doctor, I cannot possibly stay off my feet for a week. Who will help you with patients, Mrs. Chen has been asking to volunteer, Dr. Morrison said. She has some training in traditional medicine. This will be a good opportunity for her. Adelaide knew when she was beaten. She nodded stiffly, already dreading the enforced idleness. Doctor. Morrison cleaned and bandaged her hands as well, clucking over the deep scrapes. You should go home and rest, he told her. Mr. Zimmerman, would you be so kind as to escort Miss Preston to her residence? I would go myself, but I should stay with Mrs. Henderson. It would be my pleasure, Lucas said before Adelaide could protest. She found herself being helped back onto his horse, this time sitting sideways in front of him while he kept one arm around her waist to steady her. It was even more intimate than the ride into town, and Adelaide was intensely aware of every point where their bodies touched. Where do you live? Lucas asked. The boarding house on 3rd Street, Mrs. O'Brien's place. He guided his horse through the streets with the same easy competence he had shown on the open prairie. Adelaide kept her eyes forward, refusing to look at the faces she knew were watching from windows and doorways. The gossip would be all over town by morning. Adelaide Preston, the spinster who worked at the hospital, riding through town in the arms of a strange man. As if her reputation was not already in tatters, Mrs. O'Brien was sweeping the front porch when they arrived, her round face creasing with concern. Adelaide, I heard about the robbery. Are you all right, dear? Just a sprained ankle, Mrs. O'Brien. Adelaide let Lucas help her down, gritting her teeth against the pain as her feet touched the ground. And who is this handsome young man? Mrs. O'Brien asked with poorly concealed interest. Lucas Zimmerman, madam. I own the ranch east of town. Oh yes, the Henderson place. You have done wonders with it, I hear, though we do not see you in town much. There was a question in her tone. I prefer to keep busy with the ranch, Lucas said diplomatically. He turned to Adelaide. May I call on you tomorrow to see how you are recovering? Adelaide opened her mouth to refuse, but Mrs. O'Brien cut in. Of course you may. Adelaide will be happy for the company while she is laid up. Won't you, dear? There was no polite way to refuse now. That would be acceptable, Adelaide said stiffly. Lucas smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. Until tomorrow then, Miss Preston. He rode away, and Adelaide let Mrs. O'Brien help her inside and up the stairs to her small room. The landlady fussed over her, bringing hot water for washing and a tray of food, all while asking questions about Lucas Zimmerman that Adelaide could not answer. Such a handsome man, Mrs. O'Brien said as she helped Adelaide out of her torn dress, and clearly taken with you. He was being polite, Adelaide said. Nothing more. Mrs. O'Brien did not sound convinced. We will see. After she left, Adelaide sank onto her narrow bed and closed her eyes. The day's events washed over her in a wave of delayed reaction. She had been shot at, thrown from a horse, and watched a man die. She had ridden through town twice in the arms of a stranger, undoubtedly providing fodder for weeks of gossip. and Lucas Zimmerman was going to call on her tomorrow. She told herself it meant nothing. He was simply being kind, checking on someone who had been injured. It certainly did not mean anything romantic. Men did not call on Adelaide Preston with romantic intentions. The town had made that clear enough over the years. Too tall, they said. Too outspoken. Too educated. Too independent. She worked at the hospital, which meant she saw things no proper lady should see. She read medical journals and spoke knowledgeably about anatomy and disease. She had opinions on politics and was not afraid to voice them. She had turned down the only 2 marriage proposals she had ever received because both men had expected her to give up her work at the hospital. At 24, she was firmly on the shelf, as her mother had sadly acknowledged before she died 2 years ago. Even her father, before he passed when Adelaide was 20, had worried about her prospects. "You are too much like your mother," he had told her once, not unkindly. "Too smart for your own good. It scares men." Adelaide had not understood then why being intelligent should scare anyone. She still did not understand it, but she had learned to accept that she would likely remain unmarried, and she had made her peace with it. She had her work, which she loved. She had her small room and her books and her independence. It was more than many women had. Still, she thought as she drifted off to sleep, it might be nice to have someone look at her the way Lucas Zimmerman had looked at her today. As if she were someone worth seeing. Morning brought fresh pain and stiffness in her ankle, along with Mrs. O'Brien bearing a breakfast tray and fresh gossip. "The whole town is talking about yesterday," she said cheerfully, as she set the tray on Adelaide's bedside table. "Mrs. Fletcher saw you riding behind Mr. Zimmerman with your arms around his waist. She said it was positively scandalous." "I was injured and needed transport," Adelaide said wearily. "There was nothing scandalous about it. Of course not, dear, but you know how people talk." Mrs. O'Brien fluffed Adelaide's pillows unnecessarily, "Especially about you." "Yes," Adelaide said quietly, "I know." She ate her breakfast alone, then spent the morning reading a medical journal that Dr. Morrison had lent her. Around noon, there was a knock at her door, and Mrs. O'Brien's voice called out, "Adelaide, you have a visitor." Her heart jumped, which was ridiculous. Lucas Zimmerman was just being polite. She smoothed her hair, grateful that Mrs. O'Brien had helped her dress in her good blue calico that morning, and called, "Come in." Lucas entered carrying a bouquet of wildflowers and looking decidedly uncomfortable. "Miss Preston, I hope I am not disturbing you." "Not at all, Mr. Zimmerman. Please sit." She gestured to the single chair in her small room, acutely aware of how shabby it must seem. The room was barely large enough for a bed, a chair, and a small dresser. Her few possessions were neatly arranged, but there was no hiding the worn rug or the water stain on the ceiling. Lucas sat, holding the flowers awkwardly. "I brought these. I was not sure if it was appropriate, but my mother always said flowers brightened any sick room." Adelaide felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "They are lovely, thank you." She took them and arranged them in the water pitcher on her dresser, the only container available. "How is Mrs. Henderson?" "I rode to Lawrence last night and brought her daughter back this morning. She is with her mother now at the hospital. Dr. Morrison says the prognosis is good." "I am glad to hear it." Adelaide settled back on her bed, propping her injured ankle on a pillow. "That was kind of you to make the journey. It was the least I could do." Lucas leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. "How are you feeling today?" "Sore, but I will survive. I have had worse injuries." "You said that yesterday." "What did you mean?" Adelaide hesitated, then shrugged. "Working at the hospital can be dangerous. People in pain are not always rational. I have been pushed, scratched, bitten. Once a delirious man with a fever threw a bedpan at me. It missed, thankfully. Lucas frowned. Does Dr. Morrison not protect you? He does his best. But he is elderly and he cannot be everywhere at once. I can handle myself. I do not doubt that, Lucas said, and there was that note in his voice again, the one that made Adelaide feel seen in a way she was not accustomed to. You are remarkable, Miss Preston. She laughed, uncomfortable with the compliment. I am many things, Mr. Zimmerman, but remarkable is not one of them. The town has made that clear. What do you mean? Adelaide looked down at her hands, still bandaged from yesterday's ordeal. She should not tell him. She barely knew him. But something about his steady gaze made her want to be honest. The town thinks I am unmarriageable, she said quietly. Too old, too tall, too outspoken, too invested in my work. I have been told these things more times than I can count. Mrs. Fletcher once told my mother, right in front of me, that I would never find a husband because I frightened men with my unnatural interests. Anger flashed across Lucas's face. That is absurd, perhaps, but it is the truth nonetheless. Adelaide met his eyes. I am not telling you this to gain your pity, Mr. Zimmerman. I simply want you to understand that your kindness, while appreciated, will only fuel the gossip. The town will assume you are courting me, and when you do not, they will say it is because I am unworthy of courtship. It is a game I have grown tired of playing. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, What if I were courting you? Adelaide's breath caught. I beg your pardon. What if I wanted to court you, Miss Preston? Would you be opposed? She stared at him, certain she had misheard. You cannot be serious. I am entirely serious. He stood and crossed to her bedside, looking down at her with those remarkable eyes. I know we have only just met. I know this must seem sudden, but I saw you yesterday, Miss Preston, calm and capable in the face of danger. I saw you care for a stranger with gentle hands and a kind heart. I saw you climb onto a horse with a sprained ankle because you knew we had no time to waste. And I thought to myself, this is a woman worth knowing. You know nothing about me, Adelaide whispered. Then let me learn. Let me call on you properly. Let me take you riding when your ankle heals, and to dinner at the hotel, and to church on Sunday. Let me prove to this town that they have been fools to overlook you. It was everything Adelaide had secretly wanted and convinced herself she could never have. It was too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Why? She asked. Why me? You could court any woman in this town, pretty young things who would be thrilled to have your attention. I do not want pretty young things, Lucas said. I want a woman who is not afraid to speak her mind. A woman who is brave and kind and smart. A woman who can deliver twins when the doctor collapses from exhaustion. He smiled. I want you, Adelaide Preston, if you will have me. Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes and she blinked them back furiously. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears solved nothing, but the sincere hope in Lucas's face made something crack inside her carefully constructed armor. Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, you may court me. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Thank you. You will not regret this, I promise. I hope not, Adelaide said, though a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that she was a fool to believe him. But for once, she decided to ignore that voice. Lucas visited every day for the next week while Adelaide recovered. He brought books from his ranch, novels and poetry that they discussed at length. He told her about his life before Opal, how he had grown up in Missouri on a farm, how he had saved every penny for 10 years to buy his own land, how his parents had died in a cholera outbreak when he was 20, leaving him and his younger sister alone. Where is your sister now? Adelaide asked. Married to a shopkeeper in St. Louis. She has 2 children and a husband who adores her. She is happy. There was warmth in his voice when he spoke of his sister, and Adelaide found herself warming to him even more. She told him about her own life, about her parents who had encouraged her unusual interest in medicine, about how she had begged Dr. Morrison to let her work at the hospital after her father died and they needed the money, about the satisfaction she found in helping people, even when they looked down on her for doing so. "My mother always said I was born stubborn," Adelaide confided one afternoon. "Even as a child, I questioned everything. Why did women have to wear corsets? Why could boys go to university but not girls? Why was it improper for me to want to understand how the human body worked?" "Those seem like reasonable questions," Lucas said. "Not to most people. Not to my mother's friends, who worried I would never make a suitable wife. Not to the young men who called on me a few times before deciding I was too strange." She smiled wryly. "I learned to keep my opinions to myself, but apparently not well enough." "Good," Lucas said firmly. "The world needs people who ask questions, especially people brave enough to ask them out loud." By the end of the week, when Dr. Morrison declared her ankle healed enough to walk without pain, Adelaide had to admit that she looked forward to Lucas's visits with an eagerness that both thrilled and terrified her. She found herself thinking about him when he was not there, remembering the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the deep timbre of his laugh, the gentle strength in his hands. It was dangerous, this growing affection. She knew better than to let herself hope. But hope, like a weed, grew whether she wanted it to or not. True to his word, Lucas took her riding the following Sunday after church. The entire congregation had stared when he sat beside her in the pew, and Adelaide had heard the whispers rippling through the crowd. Lucas seemed oblivious to it all, standing to sing hymns in a surprisingly pleasant baritone and bowing his head during prayers. Afterward, Mrs. Fletcher cornered Adelaide outside the church. "My dear Miss Preston, I could not help but notice you have a beau. How delightful." There was nothing delightful in Mrs. Fletcher's tone. It was the same tone she might use to comment on an unexpected rainstorm or a slight stomachache, polite but entirely insincere. "Mr. Zimmerman has been kind enough to call on me," Adelaide said carefully. "How lovely for you, Mrs." Fletcher's smile did not reach her eyes. "I do hope you will not be too disappointed when his attentions turn elsewhere. Men can be so fickle, can they not?" Before Adelaide could respond, Lucas appeared at her elbow. "Miss Preston, the horses are ready. Mrs. Fletcher, always a pleasure." He offered Adelaide his arm and guided her away before she could say something she would regret. "Do not let her upset you," he said quietly as they walked toward their horses. "She was merely stating the obvious," Adelaide said. "You will grow tired of me eventually." Lucas stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Adelaide, look at me." When she did, he continued, "I am not a fickle man. When I commit to something, I see it through. And I am committed to proving to you and to this entire town that they have been wrong about you." "You do not have to prove anything to them." "No," he agreed, "but I want to prove it to you." They rode out to his ranch, a sprawling property with good grazing land and a sturdy house that Lucas had been renovating himself. He showed her around with obvious pride, pointing out the improvements he had made, the plans he had for expansion. "I want to build something lasting here," he told her as they stood on the porch, looking out over the prairie. "Something that will endure, a legacy." "It is beautiful," Adelaide said honestly. "You have worked hard." "I have, but it is lonely." He glanced at her sideways. "A ranch this size needs a family to make it a home." Adelaide's heart stuttered. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? But no, it was too soon. They had only known each other for 2 weeks. She was letting her imagination run away with her. They had lunch on the porch, simple fare that Lucas had prepared himself with an apologetic smile. "I am not much of a cook," he admitted, "but I make a decent stew." "It is delicious." Adelaide assured him, and it was. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing easily, and Adelaide found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did around others. Lucas had a gift for making her feel heard, for treating her opinions with respect rather than condescension. "Tell me about the hospital," he said. "What do you do there?" Adelaide described her work, the injuries and illnesses she helped treat, the births she assisted with, the medicines she prepared. She expected to see boredom or distaste cross his face, as it had with other men, but Lucas listened intently, asking questions that showed genuine interest. "You essentially function as a nurse," he observed. "Dr. Morrison calls me his assistant, but yes, I suppose that is accurate. Though of course I have no formal training. Women are not admitted to medical schools. That seems foolish. You clearly have the skill and the knowledge." "Tell that to the medical establishment," Adelaide said dryly. "I've tried to attend lectures in Kansas City, but I was turned away. Women are meant to bear children, not learn about bearing children, apparently." Lucas shook his head. "The world is slow to change, but it does change eventually. Perhaps by the time our daughters are grown, they will have opportunities you did not. Our daughters." The casual way he said it, as if it were a foregone conclusion that they would marry and have children together, made Adelaide's throat tight. "Perhaps," she managed. The afternoon passed too quickly. When Lucas rode her back to town as the sun was setting, Adelaide found herself wishing they could turn around and ride back to his ranch, back to that porch with its view of the endless prairie and its promise of something she had never dared dream about. Over the following weeks, Lucas became a fixture in her life. He met her after her shifts at the hospital, not seeming to mind when she smelled of carbolic acid and was too tired to talk much. He brought her wildflowers and books, and once, memorably, a stray kitten he had found on his property that needed a home. Adelaide named the kitten Sage because of its gray-green eyes, so like Lucas's, and Mrs. O'Brien tolerated the animal because it kept the mice away. The town watched their courtship with a mixture of fascination and skepticism. Adelaide overheard more than one conversation questioning how long it would last, when Lucas would come to his senses and realize he could do better. But Lucas did not come to his senses. If anything, he became more devoted. He held her hand as they walked through town, an unmistakable declaration of his intentions. He stood up to Mr. Thompson when the saloon owner made a crude comment about Adelaide being too old to still be unmarried. He spent hours at the hospital, helping with tasks that needed a strong back, earning Dr. Morrison's approval and gratitude. "That young man is in love with you," Dr. Morrison told Adelaide one evening as they cleaned instruments. "I hope you know that." "He has not said so," Adelaide replied, though her heart leaped at the possibility. "He shows it. That is often more reliable than words." Adelaide wanted to believe him, but a lifetime of being dismissed and overlooked had made her cautious. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Lucas to realize his mistake, for the fairy tale to end. It was late October when everything came to a head. Adelaide was working late at the hospital, assisting Dr. Morrison with a difficult case. A ranch hand had been gored by a bull and had lost a great deal of blood. They worked for hours trying to save him, but in the end, there was nothing more they could do. The man died just after midnight. Adelaide helped wash and prepare the body for burial, as she had done dozens of times before, but this time something inside her broke. She had been so sure they could save him. He had been young, barely 20, with a sweetheart waiting for him in town, and now he was gone. She walked out of the hospital into the cold night air and sank down on the steps, wrapping her arms around herself. She did not cry, she never cried, but she felt hollow, scraped clean of everything except exhaustion and grief. Adelaide. She looked up to find Lucas standing there, holding a basket. He must have been waiting for her. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice rough. "I brought you dinner. Dr. Morrison mentioned you had a difficult case." He set the basket down and sat beside her on the steps. "What happened?" "He died. The ranch hand. We could not stop the bleeding." Adelaide stared at her hands, still trembling slightly. "His name was Johnny Miller. He was going to propose to Sarah Thompson next month. He told us that while we were trying to save him. He kept saying he had to leave because Sarah was waiting for him." Lucas did not say anything, just put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her against his side. Adelaide resisted for a moment, then let herself lean into his warmth. "I hate this," she whispered. "I hate that I cannot save everyone. I hate that caring makes it hurt worse. I hate that the town thinks I am unnatural for wanting to do this work, but I cannot imagine doing anything else." "You are not unnatural," Lucas said firmly. "You are brave and compassionate and skilled. You gave that young man his best chance at survival. That is all anyone could do. It was not enough. No, sometimes our best is not enough. That does not mean we should stop trying." He kissed the top of her head, a gentle gesture that made Adelaide's breath catch. "You are remarkable, Adelaide Preston. Do not let this town or this loss convince you otherwise." Something in Adelaide's chest loosened. She turned her face into Lucas's shoulder and finally, let herself cry. He held her while she wept for Johnny Miller, for his sweetheart Sarah, for all the patients she could not save and all the people who thought her strange for caring so deeply. When her tears subsided, Lucas produced a handkerchief and wiped her face with gentle hands. "Better." "A little," Adelaide admitted. "Thank you for being here, for understanding." "Always," Lucas said. "I will always be here, Adelaide. I need you to know that." She looked up at him, at his kind eyes and his serious expression, and felt something shift inside her. This was not a fairy tale. This was real. Lucas Zimmerman was real, and he was here, and he cared about her, not despite her work, not despite her opinions and her independence, but because of them. "I love you," she said, the words spilling out before she could second-guess them. "I did not mean to, I tried not to, but I do." Lucas's face transformed, joy lighting up his features. "Thank God," he said. "I have loved you since the day I found you in that wrecked stagecoach, so calm and capable. I have been waiting to tell you, afraid I would scare you off if I moved too quickly. You love me." Adelaide needed to hear it again, needed to be sure. "I love you," Lucas said firmly. "I love your intelligence and your courage and your kind heart. I love the way you argue with me about politics and the way you get so focused when you are working that you forget to eat. I love that you are not like anyone else in this town, and I thank God every day that I rode toward those gunshots and found you." Adelaide laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and disbelief. "The town will say you are making a terrible mistake. Then the town will be wrong. As they have been wrong about you all along." Lucas took her hands, careful of the healing scrapes. "I know it has only been 2 months. I know some might say it is too soon. But Adelaide, I am 30 years old and I have never met anyone like you. I do not want to wait. Marry me, please." Adelaide's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Are you certain, truly certain? Because once you commit to this to me, the town will judge you too. They will say I trapped you or that you are a fool." "I do not care what they say. I care about you. I care about building a life together, about waking up next to you every morning and coming home to you every night. I care about having children with you and growing old with you, and proving to everyone that love is not about perfection. It is about finding someone who makes you want to be better." He brought her hands to his lips, kissing each one. "Say yes, Adelaide. Make me the happiest man in Kansas." And Adelaide, who had been told her entire life that she was too much and not enough all at once, who had resigned herself to a life alone, looked into the eyes of the man who saw her completely and chose her anyway, and said, "Yes." Lucas kissed her then, there on the hospital steps at midnight with the cold October wind whipping around them. It was Adelaide's first kiss, and it was everything she had imagined and nothing like she expected. It was warm and gentle and filled with promise. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Lucas was grinning. "I need to do this properly," he said. He stood and pulled her to her feet, then dropped to one knee right there on the steps. "Adelaide Preston, will you marry me?" "I already said yes." Adelaide laughed. "Say it again." "I want to remember this exactly." "Yes, Lucas Zimmerman, I will marry you." He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he was laughing too, both of them giddy with joy and disbelief that this was real, this was happening. "When?" Lucas asked. "How soon can we arrange a wedding?" Adelaide thought of all the things that needed to be done, all the preparations that proper weddings required. Then she thought of Johnny Miller, who had run out of time to marry his sweetheart, and she made a decision. "As soon as possible," she said. "I do not want to wait, neither do I." Lucas kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it. "What about your work? I will not ask you to give it up." "You would not." Adelaide had been dreading this conversation, certain that once they married, Lucas would expect her to leave the hospital. "Of course not. Your work is part of who you are. I would never ask you to change that." He paused. "Though I hope you will live at the ranch with me. It is a long ride into town, but we can get you a good horse and a wagon, or I can drive you when the weather is bad." Adelaide felt tears threaten again, but these were tears of joy. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for understanding. Thank you for saying yes." They stood there on the hospital steps, holding each other and making plans, until Dr. Morrison opened the door and found them. "Well," the old doctor said, taking in their clasped hands and radiant faces, "I take it congratulations are in order." "Adelaide has agreed to marry me," Lucas announced proudly. Dr. Morrison smiled, genuine warmth in his expression. "Then congratulations indeed. She is a fine woman, Mr. Zimmerman. You are a lucky man." "I know," Lucas said, looking at Adelaide. "Believe me, I know." The news spread through Opal faster than wildfire. By noon the next day, everyone knew that Lucas Zimmerman had proposed to Adelaide Preston, and the town was divided in its opinions. Some, like Mrs. O'Brien and Dr. Morrison, were genuinely happy for them. Mrs. O'Brien wept with joy and immediately began planning a celebration. Dr. Morrison promised to give Adelaide away since her parents were gone. Others were less enthusiastic. Mrs. Fletcher sniffed and said it would not last. Mr. Thompson made crude jokes about what Lucas must see in Adelaide if it was not her looks or charm. Young Sarah Thompson, still grieving for Johnny Miller, told Adelaide tearfully that she was lucky to have found love and should hold onto it tight. Adelaide tried to ignore the skeptics and focus on the well-wishers. She threw herself into wedding preparations, though she kept them simple. She had no desire for a lavish ceremony, just a small gathering of people who truly cared about them. Lucas wanted to announce their engagement officially, to make it clear to the entire town that he was proud to marry Adelaide. He took out an advertisement in the local newspaper and asked the minister to announce it from the pulpit on Sunday. He walked through town with Adelaide on his arm, stopping to introduce her to people he knew, making it clear through word and deed that he considered her a prize, not a consolation. It was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. Adelaide had spent so long being overlooked that being the center of attention felt foreign and uncomfortable. But Lucas's steady presence beside her made it bearable. Whenever her confidence wavered, whenever she heard whispers or saw disapproving looks, He would squeeze her hand and smile at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. They set the wedding for the first Saturday in November, just 3 weeks away. It would be a simple ceremony in the church, followed by a small dinner at the hotel for close friends. Adelaide made her own dress, a practical but pretty creation in cream-colored wool that would be warm enough for the November chill and useful enough to wear again afterward. The night before the wedding, Mrs. O'Brien hosted a small gathering for Adelaide. Dr. Morrison came and his wife, and a few other women who had befriended Adelaide over the years, even Mrs. Chen, who had been volunteering at the hospital, attended with a beautiful embroidered handkerchief as a gift. "You will be happy," Mrs. Chen told Adelaide in her careful English. "He is a good man. I see the way he looks at you, like you are the moon and the stars." Adelaide felt her throat tighten. "I hope so. I'm afraid sometimes that I will wake up and it will all have been a dream." "Not dream," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Real. You deserve real happiness, Miss Adelaide. You give so much to others. Now someone gives to you." That night, alone in her small room for the last time, Adelaide looked at her wedding dress hanging on the door and tried to comprehend that her life was about to change completely. Tomorrow, she would marry Lucas Zimmerman. Tomorrow, she would become a wife. Tomorrow, she would leave this little room and move to the ranch and begin a new chapter of her life. She was not afraid, she realized. She was ready. The morning of the wedding dawned cold and clear, the sky a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds. Adelaide dressed carefully, her hands steady as she pinned up her hair and fastened the pearl earrings that had been her mother's. Mrs. O'Brien came to help her with her dress and cried the entire time. "You look beautiful, dear," the landlady sniffled. "Your mother would be so proud." Adelaide looked at herself in the small mirror over her dresser. She did not look beautiful, not in the way that word was usually meant, but she looked happy, and that was better. Dr. Morrison arrived to escort her to the church. He looked distinguished in his best suit, and when he saw Adelaide, his eyes grew misty. "Your father would have been honored to walk you down the aisle," he said. "I hope I can do him justice." "You already have," Adelaide said, hugging him. "You have been so kind to me, Doctor. I will never forget it." The church was surprisingly full when they arrived. Adelaide had expected only a handful of guests, but it seemed half the town had turned out. Some were surely there out of curiosity, wanting to see the odd spectacle of Adelaide Preston getting married. But others, she was touched to see, seemed genuinely happy for her. And then she saw Lucas standing at the altar and everything else faded away. He looked handsome in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his expression nervous and excited. When he saw her, his face lit up with such pure joy that Adelaide felt her own smile grow to match it. Dr. Morrison walked her down the aisle, and Adelaide was grateful for his steady presence because her legs felt strangely weak. When they reached the front, Dr. Morrison placed her hand in Lucas's, and Adelaide felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. The minister began the ceremony, but Adelaide barely heard the words. She was too focused on Lucas, on the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the world, on the warmth of his hand holding hers, on the promise implicit in this moment. "Do you, Lucas Zimmerman, take Adelaide Preston to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" "I do," Lucas said firmly, his voice carrying clearly through the church. "And do you, Adelaide Preston, take Lucas Zimmerman to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" Adelaide looked into Lucas's eyes and said, "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me by the state of Kansas, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Zimmerman, you may kiss your bride." Lucas did not need to be told twice. He pulled Adelaide close and kissed her soundly, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. When they broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Adelaide caught sight of Mrs. Fletcher in one of the pews. The older woman's face was pinched with disapproval, but Adelaide found she did not care. Let Mrs. Fletcher think what she wanted. Adelaide was married to a man who loved her, who respected her, who thought she hung the moon. That was all that mattered. They signed the marriage certificate with Dr. Morrison and Mrs. O'Brien as witnesses, and then they were swept outside into the cold November sunshine, pelted with rice and good wishes. Someone had decorated Lucas's wagon with ribbons and tin cans, and Adelaide laughed at the sight of it. The dinner at the hotel was a lively affair. Lucas had spared no expense, ordering the best food and wine available. He made a speech thanking everyone for coming and praising Adelaide so effusively that she blushed scarlet. Dr. Morrison made a speech about how proud he was of his protégé. Even Mr. Thompson, who had been skeptical of their courtship, stood up and wished them well. But the best moment came near the end of the evening when Mrs. Fletcher approached their table. Adelaide braced herself for some cutting remark, but instead the older woman said stiffly, "Mr. Zimmerman, Mrs. Zimmerman, I wanted to apologize." Adelaide nearly fell off her chair. "Apologize?" "Yes." Mrs. Fletcher looked uncomfortable but determined. "I was wrong about you, Adelaide. I judged you harshly because you did not fit my idea of what a woman should be. But watching you today, seeing how happy you and Mr. Zimmerman are together, I realized that my idea was too narrow. You deserve this happiness, and I am sorry I ever suggested otherwise." It was perhaps the most shocking thing that had happened all day. Adelaide recovered enough to say, "Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher. I appreciate you saying that." After Mrs. Fletcher left, Lucas leaned over and whispered, "See, I told you we would prove them wrong." "You did," Adelaide agreed. "Though I never imagined Mrs. Fletcher would actually apologize. She is not a bad woman, just set in her ways. People can change when they see the truth clearly enough." As the evening wound down, Adelaide found herself growing nervous about what came next. She was a married woman now, and married women were expected to share their husband's bed. She had assisted with enough births to understand the basic mechanics of conception, but the reality of it, the intimacy of it, suddenly seemed overwhelming. Lucas must have sensed her tension because he took her hand and said quietly, "We will go slowly. There is no rush. We have the rest of our lives." His understanding made her love him even more. They said their goodbyes and drove to the ranch in the decorated wagon, tin cans clattering behind them. The sun was setting by the time they arrived, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Lucas carried her over the threshold, a tradition that made Adelaide laugh despite her nerves. He set her down gently in the main room, which he had cleaned and decorated with more wildflowers. "Welcome home, Mrs. Zimmerman," he said. Adelaide looked around at what was now her home. It was larger than her little room at the boarding house, with a real kitchen and a sitting area and a bedroom that Lucas had clearly put effort into making welcoming. There were new curtains on the windows and a quilt on the bed that must have cost him dearly. "It is wonderful," she said honestly. "Thank you for making it so nice. I wanted you to feel comfortable here." Lucas took her hands. "Adelaide, I meant what I said. We do not have to do anything tonight if you are not ready. I can sleep on the floor or in the barn." Adelaide shook her head. "No, I want to. I am just nervous. I have never done this before." "Neither have I," Lucas admitted, which surprised her. "Really, really. I waited for the right person. I wanted it to mean something." He cupped her face in his hands. "It means everything with you." He kissed her then, slow and sweet, and Adelaide felt her nervousness begin to melt away. This was Lucas, her husband, the man who had chosen her when no one else had. She trusted him completely. What followed was tender and gentle, Lucas taking his time to make sure she was comfortable, murmuring words of love and reassurance. There was some pain, but also wonder, and by the end, Adelaide understood why people wrote poems about this kind of intimacy. It was not just physical, it was a joining of souls, a promise made flesh. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, Adelaide's head on Lucas's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Are you all right?" he asked, stroking her hair. "More than all right," Adelaide said. "Happy, so very happy. Good. I intend to make you happy every day for the rest of our lives. That is a tall order. Then I had better get started." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Adelaide Zimmerman." She smiled at the sound of her new name. "I love you too." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. They had found each other. The first months of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Adelaide learned the rhythms of ranch life, helping Lucas with chores when she was not working at the hospital. Lucas learned to adjust his schedule around her work, driving her into town on days when the weather was bad and meeting her after her shifts when he could. They argued occasionally, as all couples do. Adelaide thought Lucas worked too hard and did not rest enough. Lucas thought Adelaide took on too much at the hospital and did not prioritize her own health. But they learned to compromise, to communicate, to support each other even when they disagreed. The town slowly adjusted to seeing them together. Adelaide was no longer Adelaide Preston, the spinster who worked at the hospital. She was Mrs. Lucas Zimmerman, the rancher's wife who also happened to work at the hospital. It was a subtle but significant shift. Marriage had given her a legitimacy in the eyes of the community that her work alone never had. Some people, like Mrs. Fletcher, seemed to genuinely reconsider their opinions about Adelaide. Others remained skeptical but kept their opinions to themselves now that she had a husband to defend her honor. Adelaide found she did not care much either way. She had Lucas, she had her work, and she had a home. That was enough. Christmas came and went, a joyful celebration in their ranch house with Dr. Morrison and his wife as guests. In January, a blizzard trapped them inside for 3 days, and they spent the time reading by the fire and talking and making love in the big warm bed. In February, Adelaide realized she was pregnant. She told Lucas over breakfast one morning, simply and directly. "I am going to have a baby." Lucas dropped his fork. "What? I am pregnant. About 3 months along, I think." He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen. "A baby! We are going to have a baby!" Adelaide laughed, dizzy and delighted by his reaction. "I take it you are pleased?" "Pleased, Adelaide, I am over the moon." "When?" "How are you feeling?" "You need to rest more. Should I get Dr. Morrison?" "Breathe, Lucas." She cupped his face in her hands. "I am fine. The baby should come in August, and yes, I will need to rest more as I get further along, but for now I can continue working." Lucas wanted to wrap her in cotton wool and forbid her from doing anything strenuous, but Adelaide put her foot down. "I am pregnant, not made of glass. Women have been working through pregnancies since the beginning of time. I will be careful, but I will not stop living my life." They compromised. Adelaide reduced her hours at the hospital as her pregnancy progressed, and Lucas took over all the heavy chores around the ranch. Dr. Morrison monitored her closely, pleased that she was healthy and strong. The town was fascinated by Adelaide's pregnancy. Some seemed surprised that she could be both a wife and a mother and still maintain her interest in medicine. Others saw it as proof that she had finally become properly domesticated. Adelaide ignored both groups and focused on preparing for the baby's arrival. Lucas built a cradle by hand, spending hours in his workshop to get it perfect. Adelaide sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small they were. They argued good-naturedly about names. Lucas wanted to name a boy after Adelaide's father. Adelaide wanted to name a girl after Lucas's mother. "What if we have twins?" Lucas joked. "Then we can use both names." "Lord, I hope not," Adelaide said. "One is going to be challenging enough." But secretly, she hoped for twins. She had helped deliver enough babies to know that it was possible, and something about the idea appealed to her. 2 children to love, 2 lives to shape and guide. It seemed almost greedy, but then again, a year ago she had thought marriage itself was an impossible dream. As spring turned to summer and Adelaide's belly grew, Lucas became increasingly protective. He hated to let her out of his sight, always worried that something would happen when he was not there. Adelaide found it equal parts endearing and exasperating. "I am not going to break," she told him for the 100th time. "Women have been doing this forever. I know. But you are my woman and this is my child and I am allowed to worry. Fair enough. But you have to let me breathe occasionally." He did try, though Adelaide could tell it cost him. She loved him all the more for trying. In late July, Adelaide officially stopped working at the hospital. Dr. Morrison had trained Mrs. Chen to take over most of Adelaide's duties, and the older woman was proving to be a skilled and compassionate assistant. Adelaide felt a pang at leaving, but she knew it was temporary. She would return after the baby was born, once she had recovered, and they had found a suitable arrangement for childcare. The baby came on a sweltering August afternoon. Adelaide was in the garden, picking vegetables for dinner, when the first contraction hit. She straightened up, one hand on her lower back, and felt a rush of fluid down her legs. "Lucas," she called. He came running from the barn, took one look at her face, and went pale. "Is it time?" "It is time. Help me inside, then ride for Dr. Morrison." Lucas wanted to stay with her, but Adelaide insisted he fetch the doctor. She had helped with enough births to know that first babies often took many hours, and she would need professional help before the end. Mrs. Chen arrived with Dr. Morrison, and together they helped Adelaide through the long afternoon and evening. Lucas hovered anxiously outside the bedroom door, pacing back and forth. Every time Adelaide cried out, Adelaide heard him curse and beg to be let in. "He's going to wear a hole in the floor, Mrs. Chen observed with a smile. "He means well," Adelaide gasped as another contraction seized her. The baby was stubborn, taking its time entering the world. Adelaide drew on every bit of her medical knowledge and every birth she had assisted with, focusing on her breathing and trying to work with her body rather than against it. Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Chen were wonderful, supporting her physically and emotionally, but she found herself wishing Lucas could be there too. "Let him in," she said during a lull between contractions. Dr. Morrison frowned. "It is not proper for husbands to be present during birth." "I do not care about proper. This is his child too. He should be here." When the doctor still hesitated, Adelaide added firmly, "Please." Dr. Morrison sighed but opened the door. "Mr. Zimmerman, your wife is asking for you, but you must stay out of the way and do as you are told." Lucas burst into the room and went straight to Adelaide's side, taking her hand. "I am here. I am right here." "Good," Adelaide said, and then another contraction hit and she gripped his hand hard enough to make him wince. He stayed through the rest of the labor, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. When she was too exhausted to push anymore, he wiped her face with a cool cloth and told her she was the strongest person he knew. When the baby finally crowned and Dr. Morrison told her to push one more time. Lucas was there, his eyes shining with tears. "It is a boy," Dr. Morrison announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy boy." Adelaide fell back against the pillows, exhausted and elated. A boy. She had a son. Lucas had a son. Mrs. Chen cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Adelaide's arms. He was red-faced and furious, his tiny fists waving, but to Adelaide, he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Hello, James." She looked up at Lucas, who was staring at the baby with an expression of complete wonder. "James Arthur Zimmerman," she said, "after my father and yours, if that is all right with you." "It is perfect," Lucas said hoarsely. He reached out a tentative finger to touch the baby's hand, and little James wrapped his tiny fingers around it. Lucas made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe this is real." "Believe it," Adelaide said. "This is our son." Lucas bent down and kissed her forehead, then her lips. "Thank you. Thank you for him, for this, for everything." The weeks after James's birth were simultaneously the most exhausting and most joyful of Adelaide's life. The baby needed constant attention, waking every few hours to nurse, crying when he was hungry or wet, or simply wanted to be held. Adelaide was sore and tired, her body recovering from the ordeal of childbirth. But every time she looked at her son, she felt a surge of love so powerful it almost frightened her. Lucas was a devoted father from the start. He took over all the household chores so Adelaide could rest. He walked the floor with James when the baby was fussy, singing off key lullabies that somehow soothed the infant. He changed diapers without complaint and brought Adelaide food and water when she was too busy nursing to get up. "You are going to spoil me," Adelaide told him one night as he brought her tea while she fed James. "Good. You deserve to be spoiled." He sat beside her on the bed, watching as their son nursed contentedly. "He looks like you. He looks like a baby. They all look alike at this age." "No, I can tell. He has your eyes." Adelaide thought James's eyes would probably turn from baby blue to something else eventually, but she did not argue. She was too tired and too happy to argue about anything. As James grew, Adelaide found herself marveling at every small milestone. His first smile, directed at Lucas when he was 6 weeks old. His first laugh, a delighted gurgle when Adelaide tickled his belly. The way he tracked them with his eyes, clearly recognizing his parents and preferring them to anyone else. By the time he was 3 months old, Adelaide felt recovered enough to return to the hospital part-time. Lucas was initially resistant, worried about her taking on too much, but Adelaide was firm. "I need this, Lucas. I love being a mother, but I need my work too. It is part of who I am." They hired a young woman named Emma from town to help with James when Adelaide was working. Emma was 16 and one of 8 children, with plenty of experience caring for babies. She adored James and was gentle and patient with him, which eased Adelaide's guilt about leaving him. The town was surprised to see Adelaide back at the hospital so soon after giving birth. Some disapproved, thinking she should be home with her baby. Others were simply relieved to have her skills available again. Adelaide ignored both groups and focused on doing good work. She found that being a mother had given her new insight into her patients. She understood now the desperation of parents bringing in sick children, the fear that clutched at your heart when your baby cried and you did not know why. She was gentler with new mothers, more patient with their questions and worries, because she had been there herself. Life settled into a new rhythm. Adelaide worked 3 days a week at the hospital. Lucas managed the ranch, which was thriving under his careful stewardship. They took turns caring for James, though Lucas often insisted on taking the night shift so Adelaide could sleep. They were happy. Not perfectly happy because perfect happiness did not exist. They still argued sometimes, still had hard days when money was tight or the baby was sick, or they were simply too tired to be patient with each other. But they had built something real and lasting, a partnership based on mutual respect and love, and a commitment to working through problems together. When James was 9 months old, Adelaide realized she was pregnant again. She told Lucas over breakfast, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "Already," he said, surprised. "It happens. Are you all right with it?" "All right, Adelaide, of course I am all right with it." He came around the table and pulled her into his arms. "Another baby. Another little one to love. How could I be anything but thrilled?" This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Adelaide knew what to expect. She continued working at the hospital until her 7th month, then stayed home to rest and prepare for the new arrival. James was walking now, getting into everything, and keeping up with a toddler while heavily pregnant was challenging. The second baby, a daughter, was born in March of 1878 on a rainy afternoon. The labor was shorter this time, only 6 hours from start to finish, and Lucas was there from the beginning. They named her Lily Margaret, after Lucas's mother. James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly and bring her toys. Adelaide and Lucas had to watch him carefully to make sure his enthusiastic affection did not overwhelm the tiny infant, but it was clear from the start that he adored her. With 2 young children, Adelaide had to scale back her hospital work even further. She went in only once a week now, and even that was sometimes a challenge to arrange. But Dr. Morrison was understanding, and Mrs. Chen had become skilled enough to handle most routine cases. "I worry I am letting you down," Adelaide confessed to Dr. Morrison one afternoon when she stopped by to check on a patient. "Nonsense," the old doctor said firmly. "You are raising the next generation. That is important work too, and you are still here, sharing your knowledge and skills." No one could ask for more. As the children grew, Adelaide found unexpected joy in motherhood. She had always focused so much on her work, on proving herself valuable through her medical knowledge, that she had never really considered what it would be like to have children. Now she could not imagine life without them. James was a curious, energetic boy who wanted to know how everything worked. By the time he was 4, he was following Adelaide around the house, asking endless questions about the human body and how to treat various ailments. Adelaide answered patiently, delighted by his interest. Lily was quieter, more observant. She watched everything with solemn gray-green eyes, so like her father's. She was content to sit and play by herself for hours, lost in her own imaginative world. But she was also fiercely attached to her family, crying when Lucas left for town and clinging to Adelaide's skirts when strangers visited. The ranch continued to prosper. Lucas had built it into one of the most successful operations in the area through hard work and smart management. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, able to afford hired help and small luxuries. In the summer of 1880, when James was 4 and Lily was 2, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant for a 3rd time. She and Lucas had talked about having more children and had decided they were content with their family as it was. But life, as Adelaide well knew, did not always go according to plan. 3 children, Lucas marveled. We will need to add on to the house. We will need a bigger wagon, Adelaide pointed out, and more help. Emma cannot watch 3 children while I work. Do you still want to work at the hospital, I mean? Adelaide thought about it seriously. Yes, not as much as before, but yes, I need that part of myself. Is that selfish? No. Lucas took her hand. You would not be you without your work. I knew that when I married you, and I love you for it. We will figure it out. We always do. The third baby, another boy, was born in January of 1881. They named him Daniel, and he was the easiest of the three, a calm, happy baby who rarely fussed. James and Lily were old enough now to be genuinely helpful, fetching diapers and entertaining their baby brother. With 3 children under 5, Adelaide had to step back from the hospital almost entirely. She went in only for emergencies or particularly difficult cases. Dr. Morrison was getting older, his hands shaky and his eyesight failing, and Adelaide worried about what would happen when he could no longer practice. "Mrs. Chen could take over," Lucas suggested. "You have trained her well." "I know. But the town will not accept a Chinese woman as their primary medical care provider, no matter how skilled she is. They barely tolerate her as an assistant." It was a painful truth. Despite years of excellent work, Mrs. Chen still faced prejudice and suspicion from many townspeople. Adelaide had fought for her, insisted on her value, but she could not change people's hearts. "What about you?" Lucas asked. "Could you take over the practice?" Adelaide laughed. "Lucas, I am not a doctor. I have no formal training, no degree. No one would accept me." "You have more practical experience than most doctors straight out of medical school, and people know you, trust you. At least, most of them do now." It was true that Adelaide's standing in the community had improved significantly since her marriage. Being Lucas's wife, being a mother, had given her a legitimacy that her medical knowledge alone never had. It was frustrating but useful. She thought about it as the months passed, and Dr. Morrison's health continued to decline. What if she could take over the practice? It would be unprecedented, a woman running a medical practice in a small Kansas town. But unprecedented did not mean impossible. In the spring of 1882, Dr. Morrison called Adelaide to the hospital. He looked frail, his skin papery and his breathing labored. Adelaide's heart sank when she saw him. "I am dying, Adelaide," he said without preamble. "Do not try to tell me otherwise. I am old and I am tired and it is my time." "Doctor, I can try." "No." He raised a shaky hand. "This is not something you can fix, but there is something you can do for me. Take over the practice. The town needs a medical professional, and you are the most qualified person available." "I am not a doctor," Adelaide said, echoing what she had told Lucas. "You are in all but name. You have the knowledge, the skill, the experience. And you have the compassion that makes a good doctor into a great one." He reached out and took her hand. "I am leaving the hospital to you, Adelaide. The building, the equipment, everything. It is yours. Do with it what you will." Adelaide felt tears spill down her cheeks. "You have given me so much already. You earned every bit of it. Promise me you will continue the work. Promise me you will not let small-minded people convince you that you are not capable." "I promise," Adelaide whispered. Dr. Morrison died a week later, peacefully in his sleep. The funeral was well attended, and Adelaide gave one of the eulogies, speaking about his dedication to healing and his kindness to an orphan girl who wanted to learn medicine. There was not a dry eye in the church. The reading of his will created a minor scandal. Dr. Morrison had indeed left the hospital and all his medical equipment to Adelaide, along with a sum of money to help with operational costs. Some townspeople were outraged that a woman would inherit such a thing. Others, particularly those Adelaide had treated over the years, supported her right to continue the practice. The town council called a meeting to discuss the matter. Adelaide attended with Lucas beside her, determined to fight for what Dr. Morrison had entrusted to her. "Mrs. Zimmerman," the council chairman said, "no one questions your dedication or your skill as an assistant, but running a medical practice is a different matter entirely. Surely you can see that a woman is not suited to such responsibility." Adelaide stood, her hands trembling but her voice steady. Gentlemen, I have been providing medical care to this community for over 10 years. I have delivered babies, treated injuries, nursed the sick through fevers and infections. I have studied every medical text I could get my hands on and learned from one of the best physicians in Kansas. Dr. Morrison trusted me with his life's work. Will you respect his wishes, or will you let prejudice override common sense? There was muttering among the council members. Then Mr. Thompson, who had been skeptical of Adelaide years ago, stood up. I was one of those people who doubted Mrs. Zimmerman when she first started working at the hospital, but she proved me wrong. She saved my daughter's life 3 years ago when she had scarlet fever. If Dr. Morrison thought she was capable of running the practice, then I trust his judgment. One by one, others in the audience stood to speak in Adelaide's favor. People she had treated, children she had helped deliver who were now healthy and thriving. Even Mrs. Fletcher, who had once said Adelaide would never find a husband, stood and said that Adelaide was a credit to the community. In the end, the council voted to allow Adelaide to continue operating the hospital. There were conditions, of course. She would have to have her treatments approved by a real doctor from Kansas City who would visit monthly. She could not perform surgery without that doctor's supervision. But she could run the day-to-day operations and treat routine ailments and injuries. It was not perfect, but it was progress. Adelaide threw herself into the work, determined to prove she was worthy of Dr. Morrison's faith in her. She hired Mrs. Chen officially as her assistant and paid her a fair wage. She added new equipment as she could afford it and subscribed to the latest medical journals. She consulted with the doctor from Kansas City, learning from his expertise while also standing firm on her own knowledge. The practice thrived. Word spread beyond Opal that there was a woman running a hospital in Kansas, and Adelaide began to receive letters from other women asking how she had done it, telling her she was an inspiration. It was humbling and empowering in equal measure. Balancing the hospital with her growing family was challenging. Lucas was endlessly supportive, taking on more of the childcare duties so Adelaide could work. Emma continued to help, and when she married and moved away, they hired another young woman. James, now 6, started school and brought home endless questions about what he was learning. Lily, 4, was content to help around the house and play with little Daniel. In 1883, Adelaide was called to a ranch about 20 miles from Opal to help with a difficult childbirth. The mother was tiny and the baby was large, and the local midwife was out of her depth. Adelaide worked for 8 hours straight, using every skill she possessed, and in the end, both mother and baby survived. The grateful father spread word of Adelaide's skill, and soon people from all over the county were coming to Opal for medical care. The hospital expanded, adding a second room for patients who needed to stay overnight. Adelaide trained 2 more assistants to help with the increased workload. She was exhausted much of the time, running between the hospital and home, trying to be a good mother and a good medical practitioner and a good wife. But she was also fulfilled in a way she had never been before. She was doing work that mattered, helping people, and she had a family who loved and supported her. Lucas never once complained about the demands on her time or the long hours she worked. He simply picked up the slack at home, cooked dinner when she was late, tucked the children into bed and told them stories when Adelaide was too tired. He was her partner in every sense of the word, and she loved him more each year. In the fall of 1885, when Adelaide was 34 years old and Lucas was 36, they decided to have one more child. Their family felt incomplete somehow, and they both wanted to try for another baby. This pregnancy was harder than the others. Adelaide was older now, and the demands of running the hospital and raising 3 children had taken a toll on her body. She was sick more often, tired more easily. Lucas worried constantly and tried to convince her to close the hospital for a few months. "I cannot do that," Adelaide said. "People depend on me. They will survive a few months without you. You need to take care of yourself and the baby." "I am taking care of myself. I am being careful." But she knew he was right. She scaled back her hours and let Mrs. Chen handle more of the routine cases. The baby, another daughter, was born in May of 1886 after a long and difficult labor. Adelaide hemorrhaged afterward, and for a terrifying few minutes, Lucas thought he was going to lose her. But Mrs. Chen's quick thinking and Adelaide's own stubborn will to live saved her. She recovered slowly, taking weeks to regain her strength, and she knew this had to be their last child. Her body simply could not handle another pregnancy. They named the baby Rose, and she was worth every moment of difficulty. She was a happy baby with Lucas's green-gray eyes and Adelaide's dark hair, and her siblings doted on her shamelessly. James was now 9, fascinated by medicine and already talking about becoming a doctor when he grew up. Lily was 7, quieter and more artistic, spending hours drawing pictures of the prairie and the animals on the ranch. Daniel was 5, energetic and adventurous, always getting into mischief. And now there was Rose, completing their family. Adelaide looked at her 4 children sometimes and marveled at how far she had come. From the spinster who was told she would never find a husband, she had become a wife, a mother of 4, and a respected medical practitioner. She had proved an entire town wrong, but more importantly, she had proved herself right. She had believed she could have both a career and a family, and she had made it happen through hard work and determination and the love of a good man. Lucas still looked at her sometimes the way he had that first day, as if she were someone extraordinary. And Adelaide, who had spent so many years believing she was too much and not enough, had finally learned to see herself through his eyes. To believe that she was worthy of love, worthy of happiness, worthy of everything life had given her. The years passed in a blur of work and family and small joys. James went off to medical school in Kansas City when he was 18, fulfilling his dream of becoming a doctor. He wrote home regularly, telling Adelaide about his studies and asking her advice on difficult cases. She was proud of him beyond measure. Lily married a schoolteacher when she was 19 and moved to a neighboring town. She and her husband visited often, and Adelaide loved seeing her quiet daughter bloom into a confident young woman. Daniel took over more and more of the ranch work as Lucas got older, proving to have his father's skill with horses and cattle. He was courting a young woman from town, and Adelaide suspected there would be another wedding soon. Rose, the baby of the family, was 15 and still at home. She was studying to be a teacher, but Adelaide secretly hoped she might develop an interest in medicine. Rose often came to the hospital to help, showing a natural aptitude for the work. Adelaide herself was 53 now, her dark hair streaked with gray, her hands showing the wear of decades of hard work. Lucas was 55, his own hair graying at the temples, but still strong and healthy. They had been married for 30 years, and Adelaide loved him more now than she had on their wedding day. On a warm September evening, they sat on their porch watching the sun set over the prairie. The children were all out, leaving them alone for a rare, quiet moment. "Do you remember the day we met?" Lucas asked, taking her hand. "Of course. You found me in that wrecked stagecoach looking like a disaster. You looked beautiful, brave and competent and absolutely beautiful." Adelaide laughed. "You are looking at the past through rose-colored glasses." "Maybe, but I still think you are beautiful, more so now than ever." She looked at him, at the face that was as familiar to her as her own, at the eyes that still held the same warmth and love they had 30 years ago. We had a good life, did we not? We had a wonderful life. We still have a wonderful life, and we have many years left to enjoy it. Adelaide leaned her head on his shoulder, content. He was right. They had built something lasting here, something that would endure long after they were gone. Their children, their ranch, the hospital that still served the community. But more than that, they had built a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. "I love you, Lucas Zimmerman," she said softly. "I love you too, Adelaide Zimmerman. Always." They sat there as darkness fell, watching the stars come out one by one. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that proved love was not about perfection or fitting into society's narrow expectations. It was about finding someone who saw you completely, who loved you for exactly who you were, who made you want to be brave enough to reach for everything you wanted. Adelaide Preston had been told she would never find a husband. Lucas Zimmerman had proved an entire town wrong. And in doing so, they had proved that the best love stories are the ones where two people choose each other, again and again, for all the right reasons. Their grandchildren would hear the story years later, about how their grandmother had been written off as unmarriageable, and how their grandfather had seen past the town's prejudices to the remarkable woman beneath. About how Adelaide had become one of the most respected medical practitioners in the county, despite having no formal training. About how Lucas had supported her dreams even when it was unconventional, even when people said a wife and mother had no business running a hospital. The story would be passed down through generations, a testament to what was possible when you refused to accept the limitations others tried to place on you. When you believed in yourself and found someone who believed in you too. As Adelaide and Lucas grew old together, their love only deepened. When Lucas's health began to fail in his 70s, Adelaide cared for him with the same gentle hands that had treated thousands of patients over the years. When Adelaide's arthritis made it difficult to work at the hospital, Lucas was there to massage her aching joints and remind her of all the lives she had saved, all the good she had done. They died within 6 months of each other, Adelaide first at 78 and Lucas following at 80, his heart broken by her loss but content in the knowledge that they would be together again. Their funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives they had touched over the decades. James, now a successful doctor himself, gave a eulogy for his mother. "She was told she would never amount to anything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She was told she was too tall, too outspoken, too educated, too independent. She was told she would never find a husband, never have a family, never be accepted. But she did not let other people's limitations define her. She lived her life on her own terms, and in doing so, she changed this entire community for the better. She showed us that there is no single path to happiness, no single way to be a woman or a wife or a mother. She showed us that love is about finding someone who sees you for who you really are and loves you all the more for it." As the mourners filed past the coffins to pay their respects, more than one remembered their own encounters with Adelaide, the mothers whose difficult births she had guided them through, the children whose fevers she had broken, the men whose injuries she had treated when everyone else said they would lose the limb, the countless small kindnesses and acts of healing that had marked her life. And they remembered Lucas too, the quiet man who had loved her so completely, who had defied convention to marry her and spend his life supporting her dreams, who had proved that true strength lay not in dominance but in partnership, not in controlling your wife, but in setting her free to be everything she was meant to be. Their story lived on long after they were gone, an inspiration to anyone who had ever been told they were too much or not enough, too different or too difficult. It was a reminder that the best love stories are not about grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but about two people choosing each other every single day and building a life together that honors both their individual dreams and their shared commitment. Adelaide Preston Zimmerman had been told she would never find a husband. Lucas Zimmerman had proved an entire town wrong, and in their love, they had found something more precious than acceptance or approval. They had found a partnership that allowed them both to be fully themselves, a love that asked nothing except honesty and gave everything in return. That was their legacy, passed down through their children and grandchildren, through the hospital that still bore Adelaide's name decades after her death, through the ranch that still stood as testament to Lucas's hard work and vision. But mostly, their legacy lived on in the simple truth that love, real love, sees past all the superficial judgments and finds the extraordinary in the ordinary, the beautiful in the unexpected, the perfect in the imperfect. They had proved everyone wrong, but more importantly, they had proved themselves right. And that made all the difference.